Yes, hello guys. This time we're gonna carry on where we left off from the book, and we're on ecosystems and interactions in ecosystems. The organisms in the ecosystem are continually interacting with each other and their physical environment. Interactions include the following: feeding among the organisms. The plants, animals, and decomposers are continually recycling the same nutrients through the ecosystem. Okay, so they basically they feed off from each other. Um, Competition among the organisms. Animals compete for food, shelter, mates, nesting sites. Plants compete for carbon dioxide, mineral ions, light, and water. Okay, that's really important as well. Interaction between organisms and the environment. Plants absorb mineral ions, carbon dioxide, and water from the environment. Plants also give off water vapor and oxygen into the environment. Animals use materials from the environment to build shelters. The temperature of the environment can affect the process occurring in the organisms. Processes occurring in the organism can affect the temperature of the environment. Okay, all organisms produce some heat. So biggest example of this is when you think about the beginning of the life, there was no oxygen in the earth. Okay, so oxygen is actually produced by living organisms. Firstly, it was produced by cyanobacteria. So the first organisms that were able to photosynthesize, that were able to produce oxygen from carbon dioxide and sunlight. So now we have a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere compared to the past. I mean, really, really past, billion, trillion, billion years ago, and a type of organisms, the cyanobacteria, they actually change the composition of the atmosphere. So it's a really big change. There's an actual interaction with the physical environment and the living things. And the physical environment can also change the metabolic processes in living things. For example, maybe you heard about ocean acidification. So because we have increased carbon dioxide output from our factories, from power plants, etc., since the Industrial Revolution, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increased substantially. What this does, basically, the oceans, the oceans of the Earth, they actually suck up carbon dioxide. Okay, carbon dioxide gets dissolved in the seawater. What this does, it makes the water acidic. When the water is acidic, organisms like snails, which build their shells from calcium, they can no longer build their shells efficiently. So they start losing their shell, or they have incomplete shells. It actually makes them vulnerable. So they will die out if the ocean acidification continues. Again, this change in the physical environment is created by humans. So that again is an interaction by itself. Now, carrying on. So there's a reminder here. Don't forget that plants take in carbon dioxide and give out oxygen, only when there is sufficient light for photosynthesis to occur efficiently. When there is little light, plants take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide, so they respire. You should be able to explain the reasons for this. We've already done this. So plants, why do they respire? Because they have cells, they need energy. Photosynthesis is just production of sugars. So to respire, to produce energy from the food, the sugars, you need to respire. Carrying on, biotic and abiotic factors. So biotic, which will easy to understand because biotic means biological things, so the living organisms. Abiotic is the surrounding environment, non-living things. We've done this in the previous pages. There are many factors that influence the numbers and distribution of organisms in an ecosystem. There are two types of factors, biotic and abiotic. Okay, so the two factors you need to know. By the way, I'm reminding you again, I'm not highlighting the whole thing so you can read. I'm just putting a highlight on the beginning and on end of the sentence that I want you to highlight. Yes, biotic factors are biological. Many, but not all, involve feeding relationships. Okay, biotic factors are biological. First, availability of food and competition for food resources. predation, parasitism, disease and disease transfer, preference of pollinating insects, availability of nesting sites, nest sites, sorry. And abiotic factors, which are chemical or physical factors, climate change, climate such as light intensity, temperature and water availability, hours of daylight, soil conditions such as clay content, nitrate level, particle size, water content, nutrients, light, anything that you think, anything that is physical and chemical, anything that does not live. Other factors specific to a particular habitat such as salinity, salt content in an estuary, flow rate in a river, or oxygen concentration in a lake. And another one, pollution. Clearly, which factors affect population size and distribution of organisms will depend on the type of ecosystem. If you take example of a river, some of the main abiotic factors could be, let's highlight this, ecosystem. If you think about a river, so depth of water. So what we're thinking now is how the organisms, okay, we have habitat, organisms live there, but how their distribution and their numbers are affected. So depth of water. In different depths, you will have different kind of organisms because they will be adapted to live at different depths. Simply as that. Simple as that. So your flow rate. So some organisms will prefer a slower moving water, so they will be on near to the bank, near to the side of the river, and some of them won't mind, like fish, like fast swimming fish, trout. They will be relatively high flow areas. Why they will be there? There's another advantage because those kind of fish, they're predators, and in rivers they actually sit down in current, under the current, and wait for passing by insects and other types of food or worms or whatever. So they have a reason that why they prefer to basically stay there. Type of material at the bottom of the stream: stone, sand, mud, etc. So if you have a lot of stones or rocks, then you will have a lot of algae. If you have sand, maybe you will have plants because they can grow roots into the sand, etc. So you have different kinds of organisms. Concentration of minerals in the water. So you have more minerals, you will have more algae or more plant species because they will be able to get nutrients easier. If you have less, then you will have less algae and different kinds of plants. pH. Again, the pH levels, oxygen concentration. So I'm talking about acidity. Remember, if it's acidic, then some organisms won't like acidic waters, etc. Some will like acidic waters, and so on. Oxygen concentration, cloudiness of the water, so the visibility, and the presence of any pollution. These are an example for a river. Okay, so different kind of environments will have different abiotic factors. The main thing is that you can actually give examples to this. For example, if I say, give me 3 examples of abiotic factors in a forest. So, what are you gonna say? You're gonna say temperature. You're gonna say ground material, type of soil, maybe type of the tree cover, etc. The light cover. So there will be more trees, there will be less light. So that's another abiotic factor. So this is an example for river. The one I talked about is about a forest. Carrying on, the main biotic factors affecting animals in the river will be food supply, either from plants or other animals. But other factors are important too. Large fish could not live in a shallow stream. So, talking about abiotic factors here. It is impossible to generalize about which factors are the most important. In a heavily polluted river, all the organisms could be killed by the pollution, while in a clean river, depth and flow rate might have a greater effect on the animals that could live there. The different factors may also affect one another. For example, faster flow rate could mix the water in with air, increasing the amount of dissolved oxygen. So I'd like you to highlight this. The main factor affecting large ecosystem is climate, particularly temperature and rainfall. Climate is the reason why tropical forests are restricted to a strip near the equator of the Earth, while pine forests grow in the higher latitudes of the northern hemisphere. The key point here, large areas of the Earth is dominated by a specific type of vegetation are called biomes. Okay, definition of biomes here. Temperate grassland and tropical rainforest are two examples of biomes. You could carry out some research to find out about these and other biomes. Grassland is a biome, temperate forest is a biome, etc. So carrying on. Feeding relations. So biotic factors. Feeding relations is a biotic factor. The simplest way of showing feeding relations within an ecosystem is a food chain. Okay, this is a food chain you will see here. In a food chain, in any food chain, the arrow means it is eaten by. In the food chain illustrated, the grasshopper is the producer. Grass is the producer. It is a plant, so it can photosynthesize and produce food materials. The grasshopper is the primary consumer. So let's say 0 here. This is our producer, the grass, and then you have your primary producer, consumer, and secondary consumer. Okay. Carry on. The lizard is the secondary consumer. It is the primary consumer, and it's also a carnivore. Different stages of a food chain, producer, primary consumer, and the secondary consumer are called trophic levels. So this paragraph, as you can guess, is really important. So we have the grass. It's a plant. It's a producer. It photosynthesizes, produces its own food. It grows. It doesn't need to eat anything else. You have your primary consumer, which is a grasshopper. It's a grazer. It's a herbivore. It eats the grass and transfers energy to its body. Then you have a secondary consumer, which is the lizard. Lizard eats the grasshopper, and it's a carnivore. Many food chains have more than 3 links in them. Here are 2 examples of longer food chains. Filamentous algae, you have mayfly nymph, it's a larvae. Caddisfly larvae, it's another larvae, you have a different insect. And you have salmon. So trophic levels are these, okay? Primary consumer is a trophic level. Producer is a trophic level. Secondary consumer is a trophic level. Tertiary consumer, in this case, where the salmon is a trophic level. In this freshwater food chain, the extra link in the chain makes the salmon a tertiary consumer, okay? So filamentous algae is eaten by the mayfly nymph. Mayfly nymph is eaten by the caddisfly larvae, and caddisfly larvae is eaten by the salmon. But as you will think, it's probably more complicated than this. Many animals are opportunistic, so they don't usually stick to one type of food. They will eat many other different organisms. So it's more complicated. When it gets more complicated, we call them food webs. You have another example here. So you have plankton, you have crustacean. Crustaceans are shrimps, like crabs, that kind of shellfish, lobsters, etc. Then you have fish, then you have ringed seal, and then you have the polar bear. In this marine food chain, the 5th link makes the polar bear a quartary consumer. Okay? Because nothing eats the polar bear, it is also called the top carnivore. Food chains are a convenient way of showing feeding relationships between few organisms in an ecosystem, but they oversimplify the situation, so thing I was talking to you about. The marine food chain above implies that only crustaceans feed on plankton, which is not true. Some whales and other mammals also feed on plankton. In marine ecosystems, and that voice to you, everything is plankton. Okay, they're eaten by many things, even other plankton, zooplankton. So crustaceans feed on plankton, which is not true. Some whales and other mammals also feed on plankton. For a fuller understanding, you need to consider how different food chains in an ecosystem relate to each other. Figure 14.9 gives a clear picture of the feeding relationships involved in a freshwater ecosystem in which salmon are the top carnivores. This is the food web of salmon. Yes. Actually, I want you to highlight this whole paragraph because it explains you quite well. There's a key point here before we look at the figure. Another way of describing the food chain is that it shows how energy is moved from one organism to another as a result of feeding. The arrow shows the direction of feeding energy flow. Yeah, that's just a key point here. Yeah, probably you need to highlight this as well, so it's a nice thing to know. Yes, so if you look at this one, so you can actually see you have a couple producers. Okay, what do we have? We have the filamentous algae and the phytoplankton. And you have another, it's not a producer, it's plant-dead material. So dead reservoirs, like these, the freshwater shrimp and mayfly larvae, they will eat them as well. But they will also eat the other producers. So plankton, as you know, they can photosynthesize. The filamentous algae can also photosynthesize. So they are actually producers. We can call them producers. Then they are eaten by many other stuff until it gets to the top. And the top carnivore here is the salmon and eat everything else. It will probably eat the young salmon as well, but it's not showing it here. This is still an oversimplification of the true situation, as some feeding relations are still not shown. It does, however, give some indication of the relationships that exist between, so I'd like you to know this. Okay? Still an oversimplification. It does, however, give some identification of the relationships that exist between food chains in an ecosystem. With a little thought, you can predict how changes in the numbers of an organism in one food chain in the food web might affect those in another food chain. For example, if the leech population were to decline through disease, there could be several possible consequences. Yes, I want you to highlight this and these points as well. So we're looking at for what happens if the leech population declines. So let's look at the leech. What does leech do? Leech eats midge larvae and is eaten by mature salmon. So what consequences it will have if the leeches are declining in number? Let's look at the points. The stonefly nymph population could increase as there will be more midge larvae to feed on. So if the leeches are not feeding on the midge larvae, then other organisms that are feeding on the midge larvae will increase in numbers. It's because simply there will be less leeches eating them. The stonefly nymph population could decrease as the mature salmon might eat more of them as there will be fewer leeches. So let's look at the mature salmon. So mature salmon has four main sources of food: freshwater shrimp, caddisfly larvae, stonefly nymphs, and leeches. If there is less leeches, it will rely on the other three. So they might decrease in numbers. Okay? The numbers could remain the same due to a combination of the above. So if they increase in number, Yes, carrying on. Although food webs give us more information than food chains, they don't give any information about how many or what mass of the organisms is involved. Okay, thing I talked about. Neither do they show the role of the decomposers. To see this, we must look at other ways of presenting information about feeding relationships in an ecosystem. Yes. Let me see. Well, let's finish this page and then we can stop. Yes. Ecological pyramids. Ecological pyramids are diagrams that present the relative amounts of organisms at each trophic level in a food chain. There are two main types. Pyramids of numbers, which present the number of organisms in each trophic level in a food chain, irrespective for their mass. So I like these two paragraphs in this point. Pyramid of biomass, which show the total mass of the organisms in each trophic level, irrespective of their numbers. One is numbers, one is mass. Consider these two food chains: grass, grasshopper, frog, bird; oak tree, aphid, ladybird, bird. Aphid is so it's what we call mirt in Turkish. They usually see them on rose bushes. They basically stick on to the actual flower before it opens, before it blooms, and they suck nectar out of they suck juices out of the stem of the plant. It's an insect basically. Figures 14.8 and 14.9 show the pyramids of numbers and biomass for these two food chains. So first you have the numbers. So you have grass, you have a lot of grass, individuals of grass, and then less grasshoppers and less frogs, and then less birds. Okay, this looks pretty simple. You will expect these because a grasshopper eats a lot of grass. It does not feed from one plant, and a frog eats a lot of grasshoppers. It does not eat one grasshopper every time it feeds. And birds, they eat a lot of frogs. So you expect the numbers get smaller as you go through. Because they have relatively fitting sizes, these organisms in this food chain. But in this one, if you look at it, you have an oak tree, and in this there's just, maybe this is just one oak tree, and then you have a lot of aphids. You have then a smaller number of ladybirds and a smaller number of birds. So what does this tell you? An oak tree is a large organism, okay? It's not just like small as grass. So even one oak tree is a massive organism. It can support a lot of other organisms. So you will have a different type of pyramid here. If you go to the next, this will make more sense. Biomass, pyramid of biomass is actually takes account the mass only. The mass for the first one is as you expect. So more grass, more grasshopper, less grasshopper, less frogs, less birds. In the other one, you have the oak tree will have the highest mass, and the aphids less, ladybirds less, and the birds actually less than that. In the biomass pyramid, it's almost always like this, but in the numbers pyramid, it might be like this sometimes. So again, I'd like you to remember these graphs. So these are biomass, and these are the numbers. So let's read the key point before we carry on. Biomass is the total mass of organisms. Okay, that's really important, this definition of biomass. If it refers to living organisms, this is called fresh biomass. More commonly, the dry biomass is used. This is the biomass of plant or animal material after water has been removed by drying in an oven. Dry biomass is a more reliable measure since the water content of organisms, especially plants, varies within the environmental conditions. It's not that important, but the first part is, so I like this. The two pyramids for the grass food chain look the same. The numbers at each trophic level decrease. The biomass also decreases along the food chain. The mass of all grass plants in a large field will be more than of all grasshoppers, which will be more than frogs and so on. Essentially what I explained. It's two pyramids for the oak tree food chain look different because of the size of the oak trees. Okay. Each oak tree can support many thousands of aphids, so the numbers increase from first to second trophic level. But each ladybird will need to eat many aphids, and each bird will need to eat many ladybirds. So the numbers decrease at the third and the fourth trophic level. However, the total biomass decreases at each trophic level. The biomass of one oak tree is much greater than of thousands of aphids it supports. The total if it wasn't, it won't be able to support them simply. The total biomass of all these aphids is greater than the ladybirds, which is greater than of the birds. Suppose the birds in the second food chain are parasitized by nematodes, nematode worms, small worms living in the bird's gut. The food chain now becomes oak tree, aphid, ladybird, bird, nematode worm. The pyramid of numbers now takes on a very strange appearance. Because of the large numbers of parasites on each bird, the pyramid of biomass, however, has a three-pyramid shape because the total biomass of a nematode worm must be less than of the birds that parasitize. So you can actually include parasites in these pyramids, but in the numbers pyramid, if you have parasites are larger in numbers, so they will be on top, but there will be a lot of them. And they are actually in mass, they must be smaller than the organisms they parasitize, simply because they are small. Again, should remember this. Carrying on. Why a diagram of feeding relationships a pyramid shape? The explanation is relatively straightforward. When a rabbit eats grass, not all of the metals in the grass plant end up as rabbit. Okay, that's really important. There are some losses. So why, like I said, why do organisms need to eat a lot of prey items? Like for example, why does a frog need to eat a lot of grasshoppers? Simply because they're smaller, one, and even if he eats his own mass, it won't double in size or mass. So we have something called food conversion. Not everything we eat goes actually for growth or reproduction. So there are some, if you think about a rabbit, if a rabbit eats 1 kilo of grass, it doesn't mean it will grow about 1 kilo. It will put on weight about 1 kilo. So there's a lot of losses. So starting for these losses, some parts of the grass are not eaten. For example, roots. Okay, not all the biomass of the organism is not eaten. Maybe in case of foxes that eat rabbits, they won't eat the bones. So it's not eaten. Some parts are not digested and so are not absorbed, even though rabbits have a very efficient digestive system. I don't know if I told you about this, but rabbits, they need to eat their feces. They eat their feces because while grass or cellulose passes through their gut, not all of it is digested. So they have actually sugar in their feces, glucose in their feces. So if they eat them again, they will digest them better. But not all the time they have time to eat it. Therefore, they lose some of it. Some of the material is absorbed from excretory products, and So some of the products are some of the nutrients are excreted basically. Many of the matters are respired to release energy with the loss of carbon dioxide and water. So the rabbit moves around, it loses energy, loses the glucose, most of the glucose, because it simply moves. It wastes energy. In fact, only a small fraction of the materials in the grass end up in new cells in the rabbit. Similar losses are repeated at each stage in the food chain, so smaller and smaller amounts of biomass are available for growth and successive trophic levels. The shape of pyramids of biomass reflect this. Okay? Feeding is a way of transferring energy between organisms, and a way of modeling ecosystem looks at the energy flow between various trophic levels. So we have left, and let's carry on after this, and then let's finish this paragraph, and then we stop. So the flow of energy through ecosystems. This approach focuses less on individual organisms and food chains, and rather more on energy transfer between trophic levels, producers, consumers, and decomposers in the whole ecosystem. There are a number of key ideas involved. So photosynthesis fixes sunlight energy into chemicals such as glucose and starch. Respiration releases energy from organic compounds such as glucose. Almost all other biological processes, muscle contraction, growth, reproduction, excretion, active transport, use the energy released in respiration. If the energy released in respiration is used to produce new cells, then the energy remains fixed in molecules in that organisms. It can be passed on to the next trophic level through feeding. So if it is actually used for growth, then it can only be passed to the higher trophic level organisms. Okay. If the energy released in respiration is used for other processes, then it will, once used, eventually escape as heat from the organisms. Energy is therefore lost from food chains and webs at each trophic level. So you have actually a loss of constant loss of energy whenever you step through a trophic level. That's why organisms need to eat a lot of other organisms. So figure 14.14 is an energy flow diagram. It shows main ways in which energy is transferred in an ecosystem. It also gives the amount of energy transferred between trophic levels of particular grassland ecosystem. As you can see, only about 10% of the energy entering a trophic level is passed on to the next trophic level. This explains why not many food chains have more than 5 trophic levels. So that's important. If we use the idea that only about 10% of the energy entering a trophic level is passed on to the next level, then the original 100% reaching a producer, 10% passes to B, 1% passes to the C, 0.1% passes to D, and only 0.001 passes to the E. So each time is just 10%. 10% of 100. So this is 10%. Then 10% of a 10%, which is 1%. Then 10% of a 1% is 0.1 and 0.01 and so on. Until you reach E, which is 0.001. There just isn't enough energy left for another trophic level. In certain parts of the world, some marine food chains have 6 trophic levels because of the huge amount of light energy reaching the surface waters. So simply, as you go down, the energy decreases, so organisms decrease in number. In the end, there will be really little energy transferred to the organism, then they will be in very small numbers, and they won't be able to support another level. That's why you usually have 5 to 6 or 4 trophic levels in an ecosystem. And if you look at this paragraph, so light energy from the sun, some of it's reflected, some of it goes to the producers. Okay, Some of them die, they go to decomposers. Some of them, some of the energy is lost through heat, metabolic processes. Then some of it is eaten by primary consumers. Some of these primary consumers die, and they are not eaten by anything else, so they are left for decomposers. Some of it again goes to the goes out as heat, and some of it is eaten. And some of the energy transferred again here goes to the heat. Some of them dies, and you have a small percentage as you go up. Hope this diagram makes sense. It's not really complicated actually. Yes, I will stop here for today. I just don't want to uploading of this video to take forever, so I will just stop right here. Yeah, send me if you have any questions, and talk to you again soon. Bye bye.